Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel NPA Discovery. Today, we're diving into one of Hollywood's most haunting and heartbreaking stories, the rise and fall of Brad Renfro. Some of you might remember him as the fearless boy in The Client, or the mischievous Huck Finn in Tom and Huck. For a while, he seemed destined to stand shoulder to shoulder with the likes of Leonardo DiCaprio, but instead of becoming a leading man of his generation, Brad Renfro became a cautionary tale, a boy who was asked to grow up too fast, exposed to temptations too dangerous, and left without the guidance he so desperately needed. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep bringing you these stories, stories that matter, stories that remind us of the human beings behind the glamour of Hollywood. Brad Renfro was born on July 25, 1982, in Knoxville, Tennessee. His story starts not with privilege, but with struggle. Unlike many young actors today, he wasn't a Nepo baby with a famous last name to smooth his way into Hollywood. He was just a regular boy from the South, trying to navigate a world that didn't give him many chances. His parents divorced when he was just 5 years old, and young Brad went to live with his grandmother in a trailer park. That single fact alone already sets the stage for what was to come. Imagine being a child in that situation. You don't have the financial security that other kids do, and you certainly don't have the stability that a Hollywood career would demand later on. Brad's struggles with substances began shockingly early. By his own admission in interviews, he had experimented as young as 9. To many of us, 9 years old is the age of riding bikes, playing video games, or running around in the backyard. For Brad, it was already about escaping reality. And here's where my commentary comes in: when a child begins self-destructive behaviors that young, it almost always points to something bigger. Children don't just wake up one day and say, "I think I'll start drinking," or "I think I'll start experimenting." They do it because something inside them feels empty, unsafe, or unworthy. Whether it was the absence of his parents, the lack of guidance at home, or just the pain of feeling invisible, Brad was already showing the signs of a lost boy long before Hollywood came calling. Hollywood comes knocking. What's most ironic about Brad's story is how he was discovered. Director Joel Schumacher was casting for The Client, a film adaptation of John Grisham's novel. Schumacher didn't want a polished Disney kid. He wanted someone who truly understood what it meant to grow up too fast, someone who could carry the emotional weight of a role beyond his years. And how did casting agents find Brad? Not through a talent agency, not through a drama school, but through law enforcement. Brad's DRE officer, yes, the police officer who worked with him in the drug resistance program, recommended him. Imagine that, the very same environment that exposed his troubles was the reason Hollywood spotted him. When casting agents met him, they knew immediately he was special. He wasn't trained, he wasn't polished, but he had that raw energy that made people stop and pay attention. Out of 5,000 kids, he was chosen and flown to California. But here's the tragedy: from that very moment, Hollywood demanded more of him than his own family ever had. He was given a manager, but as that manager later admitted, Brad was screaming for someone to set boundaries. And those screams went unanswered. The Client, a breakout role with a heavy price. The Client, 1994, became Brad Renfro's breakout role. He was just 11 years old, standing toe-to-toe with veteran actors like Susan Sarandon and Tommy Lee Jones. Most children at that age are still learning how to handle homework and schoolyard drama. Brad was memorizing lines, carrying the emotional weight of a courtroom thriller, and navigating the enormous pressure of Hollywood spotlight. Critics raved about his performance. He was called a natural, a prodigy, a boy who could one day become the next great Hollywood star. People magazine even put him on their top 30 under 30 list. But here's what nobody wanted to talk about at the time: behind the cameras, things were already falling apart. Crew members remembered him showing up tired, and when they asked his grandmother why, her answers didn't quite add up. That's when some people began to suspect that Brad's home life wasn't stable. Let's pause here for a moment. Think about it: you're 11 years old, in Hollywood, being praised for your talent, but every adult around you is failing to protect you. His grandmother couldn't control him, his manager didn't establish boundaries, and the studio only cared that he delivered a performance. That's not a childhood, that's a setup for tragedy. After The Client, Brad Renfro could have easily been locked into safe, family-friendly roles. And for a moment, it seemed like that's exactly where his career was heading. Starring in Disney's Tom and Huck in 1995 gave him the chance to play the adventurous Huck Finn alongside Jonathan Taylor Thomas, a rising star from Home Improvement. But the irony was impossible to ignore. Disney marketed the film by calling its leads the original Bad Boys. For Jonathan Taylor Thomas, it was just a playful tagline. But for Brad Renfro, it was disturbingly close to the truth. Even at 12 years old, he was already pushing boundaries. Stories from that set are now legendary. During his audition, he shocked casting staff by grabbing a real axe and chasing a production assistant. Instead of treating this as a red flag, Disney executives considered it part of his charm. That, my friends, is the danger of Hollywood, when bad behavior becomes entertainment rather than a cry for help. And if you think that sounds alarming, it only got worse from there. Behind the cameras, production staff later recalled Brad being involved with an older girlfriend, despite being barely a teenager. What does that tell us? It shows just how unprotected he was. In an environment filled with adults, not one person seemed willing to step up and say, "This is wrong. This is dangerous. This boy needs help." Enter Sleepers, 1996. Brad's next role was in Sleepers, directed by Barry Levinson. The film was a dark and unsettling story about childhood trauma, prison abuse, and revenge. It starred some of Hollywood's most respected names, Robert De Niro, Kevin Bacon, Dustin Hoffman. For any young actor, this was a dream. But for Brad, it was also another wound. Why? Because the role required him, at just 13 years old, to embody a boy trapped in a cycle of brutality and survival. Yes, the critics once again praised him. Yes, he proved he could stand shoulder to shoulder with De Niro and Hoffman. But let's be honest, at what cost? The director himself later admitted that Brad seemed fraught with demons. He saw the signs. He sensed the struggle, and yet, like so many before him, he didn't remove the boy from the environment. He simply assigned another guardian to keep him on track. But as history shows us, babysitters don't cure trauma. Acting coaches don't heal broken hearts. Brad didn't need more handlers. He needed therapy, stability, and boundaries. None of which Hollywood ever gave him. A real-life parallel. This part of Brad's life reminds me of something I once read about Judy Garland. At 16, Garland was working on The Wizard of Oz, while studio executives were feeding her pills, uppers to stay awake, downers to fall asleep. She was just a child, but Hollywood treated her like a product. Brad Renfro's story echoes that same tragedy decades later. He was being used for his talent while no one protected his humanity. And like Garland, he was given just enough care to keep him functioning, never enough to keep him safe. Troubled adulthood and career decline. As Renfro entered adulthood, the struggles that had followed him since adolescence grew more severe. While he continued to land roles in independent films and occasional studio projects, his reputation in Hollywood became tarnished by his off-screen troubles. Directors admired his raw intensity, but producers grew wary of the unpredictability that came with hiring him. He was cast in films such as Ghost World, 2001, and The Jacket, 2005, both of which earned critical acclaim, yet Renfro's performances were often overshadowed by stories of his arrests and relapses. The boy who had once been hailed as a natural-born star was now seen as a cautionary tale. Renfro himself admitted that fame had come too fast, leaving him unprepared for its pressures. Acting was no longer the escape it had once been, it was a reminder of the childhood he never truly had. Relationships and inner conflicts. Behind the headlines, Renfro sought connection and stability. He dated women both within and outside of Hollywood, but his relationships were often marked by turbulence. Friends described him as deeply sensitive, sometimes even fragile, but trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. Renfro longed for fatherhood and a sense of family. In 2003, he became a father to a son, which gave him moments of joy and purpose. Yet, his addiction and lifestyle made it difficult for him to fully embrace the role of a parent. Those close to him said he desperately wanted to be present, but couldn't outrun his demons. He often spoke of wanting to quit Hollywood altogether, to find peace away from the cameras. But acting was the only world he knew, and the only path that had ever been laid out for him. Final years and the struggle against addiction. By the mid-2000s, Renfro's career had slowed, but he was still fighting for redemption. He appeared in a handful of projects and continued to show flashes of the brilliance that had once stunned critics. However, his battles with heroin and other substances grew harder to hide. In 2005, he was arrested for attempting to purchase heroin during a police sting in Los Angeles. He was placed on probation, but the incident made headlines worldwide, further cementing his reputation as a fallen star. Friends said that in his last years, Renfro oscillated between hope and despair. At times he spoke of getting clean, of being a better father, of making a comeback. At other times, he seemed resigned to his fate, as though the weight of his past had grown too heavy to escape. A son's inherited memory. One of the most poignant parts of Renfro's legacy is his son, born in 2003. Though the boy lost his father at a very young age, he carries with him the memory of Brad Renfro not as the troubled Hollywood actor, but as a dad who loved him deeply, even when addiction clouded his ability to show it. Family and friends have shared that Renfro often spoke of wanting to be a better father, and his son gave him moments of clarity and joy in his darkest times. While the world may remember him for his films or his struggles, his child will grow up holding on to a more personal truth, that beneath the pain and mistakes, Brad Renfro's heart never stopped searching for love and meaning. Fans who keep his flame alive. Even though Hollywood largely moved on, Brad Renfro's fans never forgot him. Every year, tributes appear on social media on his birthday and the anniversary of his death. Admirers share clips of his films, personal stories of how his work touched them, and reflections on the injustice of his life being cut short. Independent filmmakers and cinephiles often cite him as an underrated actor whose naturalism was far ahead of his time. For them, Brad Renfro isn't just another fallen child star, he's a symbol of authenticity, a performer who never needed to pretend because he lived his roles as if they were his own truth. Some fans have even organized small memorials in Knoxville, his hometown, proving that despite the industry's silence, his impact endures in the hearts of those who saw the real depth of his talent. The ongoing relevance of his story. Renfro's story remains painfully relevant today. As new generations of young actors rise to fame on social media, streaming platforms, and blockbuster franchises, the dangers he faced still exist. The lack of privacy, overwhelming pressure, and easy access to destructive habits continue to threaten youthful stars. His life serves as a cautionary tale, not only for Hollywood, but for society at large. It shows how quickly a vulnerable young person can fall without proper guidance and support. When people speak of Brad Renfro now, it's often as a reminder of what happens when talent is exploited without care for the person behind it. The haunting question of, what might have been. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Brad Renfro's legacy is the question that will never be answered, what might have been. Watching his earliest performances, critics and fans alike saw the makings of an actor who could have rivaled the greats. With his raw magnetism, he could have evolved into one of the defining talents of his generation. Instead, his career ended as a story of lost promise. That haunting, what if, lingers in every discussion about him. Would he have made a comeback? Would he have become a leading man, or perhaps a character actor with a long, respected career? No one can know for sure. What we do know is that for a brief time, Brad Renfro showed the world something unforgettable. And while his life ended in tragedy, his work remains a testament to the brilliance he carried within him. A legacy written in shadows and light. Brad Renfro's life was a paradox. On one hand, he symbolized everything dangerous about Hollywood, the exploitation of children, the lack of support, the glorification of rebellion without guidance. On the other, he symbolized the purity of raw, natural talent. He was the boy plucked from obscurity who could captivate the screen with nothing but authenticity. When we revisit The Client or Sleepers today, what we see is not just a young actor reciting lines, but a boy carrying the weight of his own real struggles, channeling them into performances that felt deeply lived in. In that sense, Renfro was more than a cautionary tale. He was an artist who gave us pieces of his truth, even if the cost was unbearable. What Brad's story teaches us about compassion. Renfro's downfall reminds us of a painful reality: judgment is easy, compassion is hard. Too often, the public mocked his arrests, his mugshots, and his reckless decisions. Few asked what he was running from, or what he was missing in terms of emotional support. It's tempting to see Brad's story as just another Hollywood tragedy. But when we do that, we erase the human being behind the headlines. He was someone's son, someone's father, someone's grandson. He was a boy who desperately needed stability, love, and structure, and instead was thrust into a machine that knew only how to take. If anything, Brad's story should challenge us to show greater empathy toward those who struggle, especially the young. Because behind every bad headline is often a cry for help that went unheard. The final note: why Brad Renfro matters. As the credits roll on Brad Renfro's life, one truth remains: his story is not just about wasted potential, but about what happens when society forgets to care for its most vulnerable. The tragedy of Brad Renfro should inspire us to do better, not just for future child actors, but for anyone battling addiction, loneliness, or the crushing weight of expectations. His films remind us of his undeniable gift, but his life reminds us of our collective responsibility to nurture, protect, and guide those with fragile beginnings. Brad once said he didn't want to be remembered as just another Hollywood story. And he shouldn't be. He should be remembered as the boy who brought truth to the screen, whose smile and intensity could light up a room, and whose fall serves as a haunting reminder of what can happen when a society fails to look after its children. So tonight, if you think of Brad Renfro, don't just remember the mugshots or the headlines. Remember the boy in The Client who carried an entire film on his small shoulders. Remember the young man who still tried, again and again, to fight his demons. And remember the son he left behind, who deserves to know that his father was more than his mistakes. He was a star whose light burned too brightly, too briefly.